Let's talk about the Alex Verus series, whether you should read it or not. G'day to all you lovely people and welcome back to my channel. I'm Kathy and today I wanted to talk about the Alex Verus series by Benedict Jacka. This is the final book in the series, Risen. There are 12 books altogether. The first book I think is called Fated, and I have actually reviewed the first book and I'll put a link to that video in my description box below. Today what I wanted to talk about was whether you should read the Alex Verus series. What I liked about it, what I didn't like, things like that. As I said, there are 12 books altogether. The first one, Fated, came out in 2012. The final book, Risen, came out in 2020. My understanding is that Jacka is working on a new series, which I think takes place in the same universe, but I'm not sure if we're going to have crossover with any of the characters. This is an urban fantasy which takes place in contemporary London. And the books are written in the first person. Alex Verus is our protagonist. And he is a diviner who is able to predict the future or possible futures. Futures can fork depending upon decisions that people make. So it's not always foolproof. There are many limitations on his abilities. He can't predict everything that's going to happen, and the further he looks into the future, the harder it is to predict what will occur. But it assists him in avoiding possible dangers. In this world that Jacka has created, several classes of people have different magical abilities. The highest up on the food chain are mages, which are divided into two groups. There are light mages and dark mages. Mages have the ability of casting several different types of spells using different elements. Below mages are adepts, who are only able to cast one spell, though it can be an extremely effective one. Light mages govern this magical world. They have a council that makes the ultimate decisions, and they also have people who enforce the rules that they have made in, I think, compacts and agreements that have been in existence for a very long time. Light mages consider themselves more morally bound, I think, than dark mages. The way Alex explains it is that dark mages don't believe in morality as such. They believe in power and attaining it at whatever cost. Even given the names light and dark, we are immediately given the impression that dark mages are bad, that the light mages are so much better, much more morally superior, less likely to be as ruthless as the dark mages. I will leave it to anyone who reads the series to decide that for themselves. This world is also inhabited with several magical creatures. There is an amazing creature called Arachne, who I think you meet in the very first book. There are also elementals and other different types of magical creatures. There are also many magical artifacts in this world. The overall plot is about, I think, this ongoing division, conflict between the light mages and dark mages. However, each individual book does deal with some conflict on a much smaller scale. Different conflicts between different groups or involving Alex. When we start the series, Alex is an independent who is not affiliated with either the light or dark mages. However, we learn very early on that Alex was an apprentice to a dark mage, Richard Drac, a very powerful dark mage. Alex, however, never completed his apprenticeship because he became quite disillusioned at how ruthless dark mages can be, and he abandoned his apprenticeship. In the very first book, Alex is approached by white mages to perform a job in relation to a relic, a very powerful relic, to use his divination skills. He is not a battle mage. He does not have any real magical power except with divination. That is his strength. So if there is, for example, any conflict, he can lead a team because he can predict that somebody, for example, is hiding behind a corner ready to kill them. Other main characters in this series include Luna, a young woman with a very nasty curse which does not allow her to touch anyone, as any bad luck she may encounter will get passed on to that other person, and it can be even lethal. There's also Varium, a young fire mage. There's also Anne, a life mage. There is also Arachne, a magical creature that Alex is friends with. Then we have Sonda, who is a time mage. There is also Cinder, a dark fire mage, and Rachel. Rachel is a very fascinating character. Yeah, she is fascinating because she is, I think, insane, but she always livens everything up when she's involved. Now I'm going to talk about what I liked and didn't like about this series without going into spoilers. Okay. Benedict Jacka is a very good writer, a very spare writer. There is no real bloat in his books, in my opinion. Is it possible that perhaps we could have done without 1 or 2 books? Perhaps, but I never felt that a book dragged for me. Perhaps it could have been condensed and combined with another book, but it was not excessive, not at all. Because we see this world through Alex Verus's eyes, we do get to see a lot of his internal thoughts about this world, about dark mages, light mages, morality, etc. However, because this series is written in the first person, I feel that there are certain inherent limitations with that. The main one being that our perspective is Alex's. We are viewing the world through one person's eyes, which is very subjective. I feel like we cannot always take what they say at face value because they could be wrong, because their impressions could be wrong, because they have internal prejudices which we may not be aware of. That's always the issue I feel with first-person narratives, or I try to keep that in mind anyway. But because we are in Alex's head, we get to understand him so well, I feel. He is a very well fleshed out and rounded character. I felt like I knew what this character was about, what kind of person he was, how his mind works. And that is a real accomplishment, I think. Not every author succeeds with that. And I think the author did an excellent job at explaining this character. And that is a morally grey character. As to how morally grey he is, I really cannot say without touching on spoilers. But I think if you are like me, there may be times where you despise this character for certain things that he does. And other times where you may admire him. Some people compare this series to the Dresden Files, which is one of my favourite series by Jim Butcher, also urban fantasy, which take place in Chicago. I think they are really very, very different. The Dresden Files' main protagonist, Harry Dresden, is not a morally grey character. I do not believe. I think he's a very heroic figure. I cannot say that about Alex Verus, which is, I think, why I found this series so fascinating. And what I really liked is perhaps we might start here, but by the end of the series, we might end up with a different opinion, say, of a particular group or character in this series. It is so hard to talk about it without going into spoilers. One of the things I really liked about this series was Jacka's writing style. I really loved his description of London, particularly at night. And I really enjoyed reading about a character who is morally grey. I also liked many of the elements that he incorporated in this series, such as the magical creatures and powerful artifacts. Though I do feel he could have gone into a little bit more detail regarding magical creatures in particular, though some we could have done without. But it added another layer to this overall story, this overall series. I also liked the use of certain artifacts to enhance somebody's magical skills. That was cool. And seeing the development of many of the characters that we see throughout the series, like Luna and Anne and Varium in particular. I loved his story arc actually. And Sandra, a time mage who initially starts off befriending Alex, and yet due to certain conflicts that arise, his attitude towards Alex does change throughout time. That felt to me very realistic. In fact, the development of many of the relationships in the book felt realistic. Some, however, didn't. There is also a romance in this series which, I must admit, left me utterly cold. And I like romances, I will not deny it, but this one didn't work for me at all. And one character in this series, Anne, has an interesting side storyline, I guess, regarding an internal conflict for her between, I guess, good and evil. To put it very simply, that storyline I did not enjoy all that much. I'll be honest, I found this character, Anne, quite boring. I won't deny it. She was not somebody that appealed to me throughout this series. She came across as a very bland character, and then there seems to be this change into somebody else who, whilst I understood how it worked, it didn't come across as realistic for me. I've seen this before, this kind of split personality thing, where you have a character who is too good, who then becomes too evil at some point. That is not an original story, and I don't think that Jacka captured it successfully. Anne was not a character that appealed to me. I thought Luna, as a character, developed really well throughout the series, and she was much more interesting. I also feel I got a better understanding of her. Anne just seemed like a cardboard cutout. I also liked how Sonda, a time mage, developed throughout the series. I may not have liked where he ended up, but I liked this change throughout the books. Jacka's characterizations were very good, I thought, overall. He doesn't succeed with all of them, in my opinion, but overall you do see development in these characters, in these main characters who appear throughout most of the books. And they seemed realistic. Well done. Now, Alex. Okay, I have to talk about Alex. Okay, I'm going to say it here. I hate him. I do. I absolutely despise this character. But this is what made the book so fascinating for me, is that I was reading about somebody I loathed. I am generally drawn to heroic figures in fantasy. It's why I love fantasy. We don't see that kind of heroism in our day-to-day lives. So I like a heroic but well-rounded character. Somebody who does make mistakes. I don't want anyone to be perfect. I want them sometimes to make major missteps as well. But Alex Verus is very morally grey, very morally ambiguous. And I think that's been generous. My opinion of him is very low. I despise him. I despise so many of his actions and rationalizations for his behavior. But it made him compelling to read about. I needed to know more about why he was making these decisions. How was he going to justify to himself even why he took a certain step? That was what hooked me and kept me enthralled throughout this series. And this, I think, is the greatest strength of these books, is a view into someone who I think is almost a villain. I think he is just a horrible human being, personally. And that made him fascinating. Something else I should mention is that I personally loathed the ending so much that I almost threw the final book across the room. I hated it. I really feel it was not the ending that this character deserved or should have got, nor did it really ring true with the rest of the books up to then. In my opinion, the ending was a major cop-out, and I resented it so much. I did not feel this was an accurate reflection of the rest of the books. It seemed just too neat and tidy, and that's all I'm going to say. Now, despite that, despite the ending, despite my feelings about this main character, I truly believe this is a series worth reading because it is so different from other fantasy where you usually have a very admirable character. That's what sets this series apart for me, and I'm actually really glad I did read it because I enjoyed it. I just didn't like the ending, but that's okay, right? We don't have to like everything in a book or series of books. In summary, I recommend the Alex Verus series. I think it is well worth reading because it gives you an insight into a character who is extremely morally ambiguous. A character who you may not find admirable at all. As for a score for the series, I have thought about this at length because it is difficult to score these books, but I think a fair score is 6 to 6.5 out of 10. Well, that is all I have for you guys today. Now, I'd love to know if you have read the Alex Verus series, what your thoughts are on it, or whether I have inspired you to read it. And you can let me know down in the comments, or you can contact me on Instagram. Thank you all very much for watching. I so appreciate all of you. And if you like this video, you can do the usual. You can like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I hope you all have a beautiful day, and I will see you next time. Bye.